Okay, well, thanks for joining me today. I'm Trent Thorne. I'm co-head of the Food and Agribusiness Group at McCullough Robertson Lawyers, and I've the very great pleasure of briefly interviewing today the Senior Managing Director and Head of Agriculture for Macquarie Infrastructure and Real Assets, Liz OLeary. Now, Liz will be one of the featured speakers at the Beef Australia Symposium on Monday, the 3rd of May. Liz joined Macquarie over 16 years ago and has held a number of senior corporate roles in Australia, Asia and the UK, including as a member of MIRA's asset management team on several flagship European infrastructure investments. In 2015, Liz was appointed as the head of agriculture for MIRA, one of the world's leading infrastructure fund managers with growing platforms in agriculture, real estate and energy. Macquarie Agriculture currently manages 2 wholesale funds on behalf of its investors with assets in Australia and Brazil. Now, I've had the very great benefit of seeing Liz present a few times over the years, and there's no doubt we'll get some frank and fearless views from Liz today. So welcome, Liz. Thank you for joining us. I understand that you come to your role with some hands-on experience in farming as you grew up on a property in the Riverina growing rice, wheat and sheep. How did growing up in this environment set you up on your current career trajectory?
I grew up in the southern Riverina. Dad was he was a mixed cropper, but got caught up in the formation of the rice industry when rice licenses were first issued on the Mulwala Canal system. So it was actually a really formative time for me because I saw some very traditional farming, and then I saw this incredible overlay of development and intensification as rice came to the district. So, I remember really, really fondly the tremendous outreach programs from the Department of Ag as farmers really set about retooling themselves in a new crop and a new sector. But look, I kicked around in the cabin of a case with Dad for most of my school holidays. And I loved being on the farm. But to be perfectly honest, when I left home to go to university, I had a passion for public policy and didn't ever think my personal passion for agriculture and rural development would ever play out with my professional life, but found myself in Macquarie Group, got an opportunity to work around the world, as you mentioned, in the infrastructure funds and other corporate roles. And so in 2015, when I put my hand up to have a go at building out this platform, I think, back to my formative years, what really helped me was obviously a natural affinity with what it means to live on and build a family life on and within the enterprise you're running. And that's the really unique piece about building investment portfolios in this space. They're not passive investments. They're not impersonal investments. This is a very personal industry, and I think it is important that you have the ability to walk not only in the corporate world I walk in, but be just as comfortable understanding the dynamics in a local area, and understand that every farm is a little bit different, and that you therefore have to be a bit nimble in the way you think about investing in this asset class.
And obviously, when you're out and about getting dirt on your shoes, checking out some of your investments, do you ever feel the need to get back into the cabin of a case?
Yeah, although my colleagues in our cropping business would hope that I would say John Deere because the boys like the green machines. But yes. I must admit that I do enjoy the toys as much as anybody else.
You're not alone there. Well, look, I know when we caught up last week, we touched upon a few Ferb issues, and I actually wrote about something as recently as this week in the Country Life, dealing with some of the Ferb, the new Ferb application fee regime, and there's been a recent Productivity Commission report that clearly found the obvious thing that Australia's rural economy and jobs, are crucial following, what is happening with the pandemic at the moment. Obviously, you're dealing with Ferb, no doubt, more than sort of some other entities out in the market. Can you give us some of your perspective on what this new Ferb application regime may do, and whether you believe there's any different treatment given to other asset classes from a Ferb perspective.
Yeah, so stepping back, I think my position on this is clear. The need for transparency and an understanding of the ultimate beneficial owner of any precious Australian asset is our right and is a good thing. So I have no issue in principle with Ferb, and actually we've been working with Ferb really constructively over the last 6 years as the regulatory regime has evolved. And so I think the regime in and of itself has a very legitimate place in the investment landscape. However, what we need to be mindful of is, when does a process lead to potential for uncompetitiveness for our sector? So we all know there's a need for capital, and we all know that capital needs to be sourced from both domestic and offshore sources. And we also know that foreign investment's been very good for agriculture for decades.
Yes.
So we need to enable it. And what I'm concerned about is when our application timelines become elongated to the point where an investor will say, that's sending a message to me that perhaps I'm not welcome, or when the cost and regime around it is excessive. It also gives the investor the opportunity to say, well, if I were to go to New Zealand or other destinations we compete with for this precious equity, North America, Canada, South America, where we start to impose a cost regime that makes our investment uncompetitive, we need to be concerned.
Yes.
And I think the other perspective is agriculture doesn't have it on its own. We're competing against other real asset allocations from these pension and superannuation funds, and they're similarly looking at real estate, they're similarly looking at infrastructure, and understandably, an investor might scratch their heads about why it is suddenly materially more expensive to go through a review process for our asset class versus other larger investments in these alternative asset classes. So for me, this is really about competitiveness. How do we remain welcome, open for business, and competitive against other jurisdictions and competitive against other asset classes?
And are you finding Ferb, it sounds like you've got a lengthy relationship with them, are you finding them responsive in terms of their timing? I appreciate there's been, since the start of March, a 6-month window for consideration. Over that period, have you found there has been a lengthening in time for approvals?
Look, if we step back over the last 5 years, we have gone from 30 days to 6 months. They've got, they are tremendously hardworking with a big workload and a growing mandate, and inevitably that has resulted in these timelines blowing out.
Okay. We might pivot to another topic then, and just if you could explain for me, how do we build competitiveness and leadership across the broad ag sector, given the sector's sort of seemingly perpetual problem of proliferation of ag lobby groups? There always seems to be another one popping up here and there, and this sort of incredible ability for us to fight in and amongst our various groups and within groups. Do you believe that we're our own worst enemies at times?
Look, the reality of our sector is we're all, there are about 80,000 of us, and we're all effectively small and medium-sized individual business owners, and we've all got our own perspectives and our own desired outcomes. And so I think it's, with that as a microcosm, you sort of understand why we are where we are. But for me, good leadership is about great role modelling. And great role modelling is about strong, consistent and coherent messages, and hearing others' perspectives, and setting a clear agenda and set of priorities that really take into account not only your individual needs but the needs of others. So I think as a sector we'd really benefit from focusing on the development of good role models, focusing on some of the really wonderful leadership development opportunity sets that sit within our sector that are often underemphasised and underinvested in. The Rural Leadership Foundation springs to mind as just one. And, for me, coming from a background in other asset classes, I'd love to see more investment in leadership as a core competency for our sector at large. And then, we've got some great role models already. I'd love to hear their voices more loudly. And, I'd love to see some more role models come through.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this is something that the sector probably has been aware of for a while, and there has been improvements made over the last decade, but there's still plenty of room to grow and absolutely make this to be, one of the sectors that all the young people want to work within.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we've got to tell our story in a way, Trent, that is clear and that really resonates and is contemporary. Often in one of the oldest sectors with wonderful, rich tradition, I sometimes think we forget to emphasise some really contemporary leadership characteristics like teamwork and collaboration. Yes. They're the hallmarks of our sector and of our history. Let's just modernise that story and bring it forward. And as you say, sort our differences out between us and then face the world, whether it be our consumers, our regulators, our markets, with just a strong and consistent voice. Okay,
great. Well, finally then, I just want to raise the topic of corporate v family farms. There's often some unfair commentary that's made in relation to family farming and the negative connotations that they don't have appropriate governance structures or the scale to compete with the corporates. Now, as you described earlier, you grew up on a family farm. You're now working for a major institutional entity. What's your perspective on this issue?
Yeah, look, the labels are a bit of a bugbear for me, to be honest, Trent, and I've spoken about this before. I think the label corporate farming tends to be used either in a positive or a derogatory way towards people such as myself, and in that there's almost a connotation that a family farm can't have corporate characteristics, and it's just a falsehood. The reality is that some of the best, well-governed, most directionally structured, focused and intensive agricultural enterprises I know in this country, and particularly in Queensland, are family-owned and operated businesses that have grown through the last decades or even century to get large, and by getting large have built the right infrastructure and governance that suits their business. I think to insinuate that those large-scaled family farms aren't corporate in nature, I think is just a falsehood, and I'd encourage people to look a little bit more closely under the bonnet at how they're managed. So for me, the labels aren't corporate or family farm. It's really about scale and where you are on that maturity curve and what your business aspiration is. So as we've grown our business, over the last decade or so in Australia, we think the secret for us is to take the best out of those corporate family farms and integrate them into some of the corporatised structures we see in other asset classes that the institutional investor expects. So they expect a different sort of regime around risk, around governance, around capital structures, around compliance that meets a whole lot of different stakeholder needs than a privately owned family farm needs to think about. So we are structuring our businesses to suit the needs of our shareholders, and our shareholders are different, but we should respect that controls, compliance and governance can sit very comfortably in both worlds. The world I'd prefer to talk about is how do we all continue to grow productivity and scale in a way that is robust and resilient. What can we learn from and take from one another? And certainly for us, we've tried to take the best out of that, as I said, that corporate family farming world, integrate it into our world and really drive the scale equation that is needed for institutional investors to come into the space.
We're kicking off the week on the Monday, and it's obviously the feature event at Beef, and we're looking forward to seeing you and continuing the conversation up there. Really, thank you again for joining us today, and we'll hopefully speak with you again soon.
Great, Trent. Look forward to seeing everyone.